Good evening, my name is Lisa Cook, and I'm running for State House in District 34. And for those of you who are here who have not yet voted and who are in District 34, I would certainly appreciate your vote. I actually, to be perfectly honest, had my arm twisted to run for office. I'm a very busy person. I'm an attorney. I've been a practicing attorney in Rapid City for 8 years. Prior to that, I was in law school, of course, and then prior to that, I lived in Wyoming for 8.5 years, and I was a licensed professional counselor there. I have one child who currently is serving in Fallujah, Iraq, as a Marine. He's 22 years old. He'll be 23 this month. In November. And I also recently became a legal guardian to a stepchild of mine who is a teenager who had been orphaned, unfortunately. I've had a number of people speak with me over the course of years encouraging me to do this, and so it just seemed like now was the right time to do it, long story short, despite all of my busy schedule and what have you. It seems to me that it's a timely endeavor to be engaged in improving our quality of life in South Dakota, and especially to the extent that one-party rule has had some benefits and has mostly had disadvantages for people. I wanted to be able to help speak out, not only engage in bipartisan efforts, but also to be the other part of that bipartisan effort, rather than a unipartisan effort that we seem to have here in South Dakota. I live here, I'm a homeowner in the Cottonwood subdivision here, just down the street. I actually went to 3rd grade in Canyon Lake School in, I believe it was 1969 and 1970, and we lived then on Elmhurst. I've also moved quite a lot of my life and have gone to public schools in Carlsbad, New Mexico, Cheney, Washington, Hunters, Washington, Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was an exchange student to South America for 1 year, my senior year of high school. So I think that I bring a broad breadth of experience, having been a licensed professional counselor previously, and also having lived in a number of different places, and then having lived in Wyoming for 10 years. Went to law school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Did go to law school for one summer semester in Guanajuato, Mexico. And so I would like to be able to work on energy issues in South Dakota and work on improving quality of life for families, particularly with regard to improving education and allowing access to children for pre-K, pre-kindergarten. Thank you.
Speak up here.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear me, but I would like folks to know that I do strongly oppose an increase in property taxes. I believe that the funding problem in South Dakota is a perennial problem. It's real. We hear sometimes from here that it's adequately funded. However, I don't believe that that's the case, and I believe that the state part of the funding formula is where we have consistently, perhaps even for decades, fallen down on the job in terms of funding education. One of the things that happens in the funding formula, for those of you who don't know, is that when we work out the funding, we're working out the funding for the future year. And so we're using an inflation index, first of all, that underestimates the rate of inflation. And so when we work out the funding formula at that inflationary level, of course, next year, that's already outdated and outmoded, and we're already starting out with that inflationary index underestimating our need for the following year. So if we change that part of the funding formula, at least we can keep up with inflation. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to be adequately funded at that point in time, but we do have a fund that's called the Education Enhancement Trust Fund. That was a fund that was started a number of years ago with South Dakota's portion of the tobacco funding, the tobacco lawsuit funding. We started an education trust fund, and if we would use the interest off of that trust fund to fund education, that would also give us a boost there. I have some ideas about an energy corridor along I-90 that may come in handy at some point talking about a different question, but I also believe that No Child Left Behind is an unfunded mandate, and we can talk to the federal government about that. Strongly opposed to what is being termed conscience clauses for pharmacists and physicians. I strongly believe that physicians and pharmacists should not be allowed to refuse to write prescriptions or to fill prescriptions based on their own personal religious beliefs. Now that said, after Roe versus Wade was passed, and most of these things revolve around women and their reproductive rights, I don't hear anything about a pharmacist refusing to fill a Viagra prescription because he simply doesn't think that that's the appropriate thing to do, and it bothers his conscience to do so. Instead, what we have is a situation where only essentially women are prohibited from access to their medications that a doctor has prescribed. Since Roe versus Wade, though, there have been various kinds of conscience clauses in various states, and so it's not actually a new thing. We hear about it a lot, but it's not a new thing. The most recent one, however, nationally, was passed in 2004, and it was called the Hyde-Weldon Conscious Protection Amendment. And those of you who remember Henry Hyde has the golf sponsor something like this, but then it passed. So what I would like to do is, since we, I think, have to probably live, for now at least, with conscience clauses, I would like to pass a bill that states that if that's going to exist in South Dakota, which it does now, then what we as consumers are entitled to, and our right as patients, what we're entitled to, is a listing and a publication of pharmacists and doctors who intend to exercise their conscience so that we can avoid going to them. And then we can make choices as consumers that that's simply not something that we want to have to deal with, where someone else is going to obstruct our right to the medication that we've been prescribed or otherwise compromise our health care. It's an incredibly complex question, and the one that doesn't lend itself well to answering in a questionnaire or in a 2-minute format such as this. This state does have a long and storied history of discrimination and racism against its Native American population. And I know that lots of people don't want to talk about that and deny that because it makes everyone feel uncomfortable. However, one of the first things that we can do is to start to acknowledge that kind of history and how not only has it impacted Indian people economically in a disadvantageous way, going back a couple hundred years now, but it continues to impact Native people detrimentally today. One of the things that I was looking at on the internet, on the LRC webpage, is that there are some Native American people who actually live and work on the reservation who do pay into, this is just an example, who do pay into the state unemployment insurance system. However, if they become employed, they are not allowed, by an error in state statutes, to actually access those unemployment benefits. So you have just a huge disparity right there, for example, where the state government and the legislature refuses to correct a problem that has been created in law. It's an oversight or an error, at the very least, where Indian people living on the reservation who are actually paying their money into a system for unemployment then cannot access it because state law prevents them from doing so. And the legislature this last term had the opportunity to correct that error and didn't. So we have lots and lots and lots of examples of this kind of ongoing disparity and intentional disenfranchisement that I think the state needs to deal with. And if the state wants to start with that, we could start with giving some land back to the tribes.